Football is back, and what a week it was. As always, there's plenty to take away from week 1 of fantasy football, and I'm here to give you 10 things you need to know for week 2. Number 1, Kyle Piits is going to be just fine. Yes, a lot of people were disappointed in what many expected to be a Hall of Fame performance in his very first NFL game, but that was not the case for Kyle Piits. He only had 4 catches for 31 yards, but there's plenty to be excited about. Piits tied Calvin Ridley as the team lead with 8 targets. He played in 68% of snaps. He was 5th among tight ends in air yards, and he did receive a red zone target. All these things are showing me that there's plenty to be excited about with Kyle Pitts' future production for this season. Matt Ryan struggled, there's no denying this entire offense did, but it's the first game post Julio Jones with a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator. It's going to take time for these things to get going. Kyle Pitts is a rookie. People forget that because he's such a unicorn. People think that he's just going to step right in. It's going to take some time. Number 2, it's time to worry about James Robinson. I've been preaching it all offseason, and I'm not talking about the gospel. I've been saying that James Robinson is going to disappoint in 2021 for a number of reasons. First off, he was extremely inefficient last year. The main thing is he got the touches. It's not going to be the case this year. It was evident by Urban Meyer drafting Travis Etienne in the first round. Yes, Etienne is hurt now for the season, but it still doesn't look like Robinson is going to get the bell cow treatment. He was out-carried by Carlos Hyde in week 1, and I expect similar things to continue because, let's face it, if they weren't going to be in a positive game script against the Houston Texans for running backs, when do you expect them to be in a positive game script for running backs? So, with that being said, the one thing that was his saving grace was he got targets. He got 6 targets. He got 3 balls. So, if James Robinson is able to catch a couple passes each game, he can still provide running back 2 type value. That's really all it's going to be. Maybe borderline running back 1 numbers if he's able to fall in the end zone. James Robinson is not somebody I'm excited about rostering this season. If he has a big game and somebody is willing to give you borderline running back 1, high-end running back 2 in a trade, I take that all day long. Number 3, don't forget about Will Fuller. Will Fuller returns in week 2 after serving a 6-game suspension that began in the 2020 season for performance-enhancing drugs. Even though he was only able to play in 11 games, Fuller set career highs in catches with 53, yards with 870, and 8 touchdowns. That was good enough for Fuller to finish as the wide receiver 8 on a point-per-game basis with 17.7. Now, there is some concern with the move to Miami that Tua isn't going to be able to get him the ball down the field like Deshaun Watson was. Now, even though it's only 1 week, there were definitely some encouraging signs. Tua was getting the ball downfield. He was quarterback 3 on intended air yards for week 1. That's not including Jordan Love, who, let's be honest, Jordan Love shouldn't count for anything. Now, Fuller is pretty much free. He's still available in over 31% of Yahoo leagues. Check your waiver wire, see if he's available. Somebody you can slide in as your wide receiver 3 or a flex play. He is a little bit boom bust, but I will say he's a guy who can make your entire week with just 1 play. Number 4, garbage time points still count for fantasy football. Now, yes, it gets ugly and you wind up in the 4th quarter pulling your hair out, wondering how you could start a guy like Jared Goff or Daniel Jones in your fantasy league. And this is more specifically for Superflex leagues, but in the case of Jared Goff, he finishes quarterback 6 on the week. Trevor Lawrence finishes quarterback 13. Daniel Jones finishes quarterback 15. And Zach Wilson finishes quarterback 18, even though they all did not play very well. They all have a few things in common. They've got teams that have terrible defenses. They're going to be playing a lot of catch-up. They're going to be put in similar situations. So don't be surprised if you start these guys and you're frustrated going into the second half. But they finished ahead of the likes of Lamar Jackson, Ryan Tannehill, and Josh Allen this week. Now, I'm not saying that you should ever start any of those guys over those 3, but do you remember a guy named Blake Bortles? How about Tim Tebow? Yeah, both of those guys were absolutely fantastic fantasy starts. Just not very good quarterbacks in real life. So don't forget, quarterbacks on teams who are bad, that are going to air the ball out, you're going to put up fantasy points too. Number 5, pick up and start Cole Beasley. Beasley's somebody who I'm really surprised isn't rostered in more leagues than he already is. He's still available in 51% of Yahoo leagues. He had 13 targets in week 1, which was good enough for top 10 among wide receivers and only one behind team leader Stephon Diggs. He's obviously Josh Allen's number 2 option in a team that likes to pass the ball. He had 14 points with 8 catches and 60 yards, and he's got another good matchup this week against the Dolphins. I expect him to produce. He's somebody who, if you start 3 wide receivers, you can slot in as your wide receiver 3. I think he's a great flex, somebody who's free off waivers, that if you're in a pinch, need a starter, Cole Beasley's your guy. Go look and see if he's on your waiver wire. Number 6, check the waiver wire to see who was dropped. Imagine going into week 1 with a team, a lineup like this: Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Saquon Barkley, Mike Evans, Brandon Aiyuk, Kyle Piits. Know you're going in and you're going to dominate week 1, and you get destroyed. It can be deflating. Fantasy managers aren't always the most rational. They make rash decisions, drop players that should not be dropped, especially after the first run of waivers. Go and check and see who's available on the waiver wire. A lot of times people panic. I saw some leagues where Laviska Shenault was dropped. Saw some leagues in one of my personal leagues, Brandon Aiyuk was dropped. So go look and see who's available. A couple years ago, I was able to pick up Nick Chubb off of waivers. Last year, I was able to get Cam Akers off of waivers. So people, when they get frustrated, they do dumb things. Don't we all? But go take a look, see who's on your waiver wire. You might be able to find a gem that could help you win a championship this year. Number 7, beware Juan Johnson. Yes, Johnson finished as a tight end 4 in week 1 after catching 2 touchdown passes from Jameis Winston, but there are definitely some things you should consider before you throw him in your starting lineup. Granted, he did catch 2 touchdowns, but he had a total of 3 targets. He played 12 snaps, which was 3rd on the team at the tight end position, 19% behind Adam Troutman and Ryan Griffin. Now, I'm not saying don't pick him up and throw him on the end of your bench. I do think that he's earned some more snaps, especially on a Saints team that is begging for pass catchers with all the injuries that they've had to deal with. But I'm not buying it. I still think Troutman is going to be the tight end on this team that emerges. Johnson will probably have games like this where he catches a touchdown here or there, but that's not somebody that you want to depend on a weekly basis for fantasy. Number 8, keep an eye on Rondo Moore and Terrace Marshall. This wide receiver class was considered extremely deep from a talent standpoint, and they showed why. Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle all had fantastic week 1s and showed why they were first-round picks. But there are 2 guys who I still think you need to keep an eye on, and that's Rondo Moore and Terrace Marshall. Rondo Moore is extremely explosive. Arizona loves to play in 4 wide receiver sets, and Moore is the perfect fit for this air raid offense. Now, even though Christian Kirk got the 2 touchdowns, Rondo Moore tied him for 5 targets and only had 2 fewer receiving yards. He's somebody I expect to get more involved as the season goes along, and I think his explosive abilities are somebody who can really perform from a fantasy perspective. Another guy is Terrace Marshall. Even though Robbie Anderson got the long touchdown, Marshall actually doubled his targets 6-3. He looked great in the preseason. This is another offense that I expect to throw the ball a lot. He was a 3rd option behind Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. Terrace Marshall is another player who I think can turn it on as the season goes on. Number 9, concern for Brandon Aiyuk. There's been a lot of talk this offseason if Brandon Aiyuk is going to be able to return to his rookie production level once Deebo Samuel and George Kittle came back. Well, if you're wondering what happened, I put up as many fantasy points in week 1 as Brandon Aiyuk did. That's right, big fat 0. But believe it or not, I don't believe it's because of Deebo Samuel. I think it's more because of George Kittle. If you look back at the splits last year, in games that Deebo Samuel played with Aiyuk, he averaged 15 points. In games that he did not, Aiyuk averaged 15.7. Not that much of a difference. He only had 1 less target per game. But games that George Kittle played, Aiyuk averaged 12.5 fantasy points. Games that Kittle did not play, he averaged 18.3, so almost a whole touchdown more. And his targets were cut roughly half, from 10.5 to 5.7. So I do think there is concern for Brandon Aiyuk. Now, I don't think you should sell low. I don't think you should cut him. I think you need to temper expectations. It's not going to be that borderline wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. I think when he is able to garner some more playing time, there was some talk Shanahan said that he needs to earn it. I think he's going to be more in the low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, who is going to have some big games, but as long as George Kittle is in town, you really should be concerned with Brandon Aiyuk. Number 10, do not overreact to week 1. Let's take a stroll down memory lane and go back to week 1 of the 2020 season. Now, I know none of us want to go back to 2020, but bear with me. Mitch Trubisky was quarterback 8 after week 1. Malcolm Brown was running back 5. Darius Slayton was wide receiver 5, and both O.J. Howard and Greg Olsen were considered tight end 1s. Yes, those are some ugly names. That's what you need to take into consideration when you freak out after 1 week. Now, I know a lot of what I've been talking about earlier in this video may seem like I'm overreacting to certain situations, but the key is look at the situation, look at what's happening before you make any rash decisions. A lot of people were disappointed in Ezekiel Elliott week 1, but he was facing an extremely tough rushing defense, and he was blocking. He was in there at roughly 80% of snaps, I believe. That's a situation where, although we underperformed, you don't want to cut bait on Zeke. So when you're looking at situations, take in all the facts, don't overreact, don't panic, stay where you're at. It's a long season. Look at the way Justin Jefferson started last season. Don't overreact. That's it for 10 things you need to know for week 2. Make sure that you're subscribed to the Front Yard Fantasy YouTube channel for all our other content. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up. Good luck in your week 2 matchups.